week in the shop, right? So we're busy. We're doing a lot of stuff. We actually had a fantastic surprise delivered to us from one of our ambassadors. So Ian at Off Quilter Crafter Ian. He's had a couple of derivations and evolutions of that name over the years. He's been a longtime friend of Cotton Cuts for about 6 years now. He's been helping us with our Puzzle Mystery Quilt program. And so we challenged our ambassadors to make a project using their Wild West colorways. And he actually sent us this cute little bag. It is so stinking cute, you guys. We love the relationships we have with our ambassadors. And he sent us this bag. It was like the perfect gift on the perfect day. He used his Calamity fabrics, and he did an incredible kind of grid quilting job on this on point. My favorite part, I love these little details, is he gave us kind of this iridescent zipper. I hope you guys can see it, on a blue zipper, and this little cute little rainbow heart tag that he put in there. Like, every bit about this makes me happy. And so I'm going to actually read the little note that he put inside of it because it was so special. All right. So, hi, Kim. Paula challenged the PMQ ambassadors to work on making projects with the scraps from our colorways that she snagged. Yeah, she totally stole them from us, by the way. Like, she would like pilfer them out of bins. Yes, Paula is sneaky. You got to keep your eye on her. All right, I made a quilt block in this Holland pouch patterned by Center Street Quilts. Center Street Quilts is a fan of Cotton Cuts. We love her too. I thought I would send it your way. Hope you can use it or maybe do a giveaway with it on one of your live streams. Let me know what you choose to do with it and what you decide to use for it. So far, I'm really enjoying the Calamity colorway and can't wait to see the final quilt when it comes together. These grunge fabrics are so much fun to work with and create a fun effect and burst of color. Yes, like, you guys, how can you not look at this and not see a burst of color? All right. Let's see here. As always, thanks for letting me be a PMQ ambassador. Sincerely, Ann. Thank you, Ann, so much. Like, that was a perfect gift for our team during the transition of the move. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Paul and I are brainstorming kind of cool things to do with this. It might go on some travels for the next mystery. It might get stuffed with random things. And if you're watching our live, you win what's inside. We will figure it out. Okay. Thank you, Ian. All right. So back to our main topic for today. So today, we're going to help demystify batiks. And so when I was first quilting, gosh, I was 13, 14 years old, I would go to the House of Fabrics that was in my town. And I remember walking into the store, and they had every type of fabric available. And they had this beautiful wall of these really bright fabrics that were called batiks. And I remember I was never allowed to touch them. That was the expensive fabric that the rich people used. And I was never allowed to touch it or pull it off the shelf. I think somehow I have this memory that if I touched a batik, I would have an allergic reaction. I don't know who told me something along those lines, but it was something as a very, very small child. I was told, don't touch the batiks. You're not allowed to sew with those. Those are too expensive. Stay over here. And so I think for 20, 30 years, I never used a batik until I started this business. Even as an adult, I would go into quilt shops and I had these preconceived notions put into my head about batiks that I was never able to really use them. They were too expensive. And so I just developed a blinder, right? And I couldn't see them. And I realized I've deprived myself of many, many years of fantastic sewing by having that. And so when Paul and I were talking about the show for today, I was like, let's see if we can put out some informational content to our folks to help them, if they have blinders, take them down, or at least give them the confidence to try using batiks going forward. All right. So I did, because you guys know I'm an engineer. I'm pretty geeky and kind of academic. I did some historical research into batiks, and the more I dug, the more interesting it became. So batiks are actually it's over 2,000 years old. There's even some that go back into Egypt, and so it's been a fabric for longer than the written language. And it's been primarily used in Asia and Africa, but it's now centralized in Indonesia on an island called Java. And it's hard to determine the exact age of this craft because where it is primarily made are tropical, hot, and humid climates. which usually degrade fabric faster. So all traditional methods of carbon dating on fabric are really hard on batik fabrics because they are so old, but they're kept in environments that are hard to date. So by saying it's about 2,000 years old, but there are mummies that are in pyramids in Egypt that have been wrapped in batik fabric, but it's a craft that is older than almost all of us, I bet. All right, it is primarily distinguished by wax resistance. And so what this means is in the fabric, if it's natural or if it's colored, wax is applied to the fabric, hot wax, that actually permeates through all the threads to both sides and creates a barrier. So when it is dyed a second time, the area that's covered by the wax does not receive the dye in the second dye process. That is truly what defines a batik, is that wax is used to actually adhere to the fibers and prevent dye from reaching it. And so when I was digging back through, I was like, okay, so I get that, right? I think I've known that it's this wax process. But going back into early culture, certain motifs were used to signify social status. So swirls, if you had a swirl in your batik, you were royalty. There was also certain cultures that had symbols in the batiks that were used for fertility, for luck, and for protection. There are certain cultures that used batiks that had protection charms on them to help babies, and then fertility for women that had trouble conceiving. And so I think it's just, we assume the batiks today, but the actual motif that's in it has significant meaning in cultures that, 2,000 years ago. In the 1800s, that's when batik's design started appearing in Europe. There was a lot of exploration and expansion, and that's when batiks really started to move into Central Europe and becoming a mainstay in clothing and in home design. For quilters, kind of the heyday for quilting was in the 1970s, and that's when Balinese batiks started to be really used for crafting and sewing. So the first batik started to appear in 1970s in the United States, and they started to have use for home sewing in the United States. And it was distinctive because it focused on natural elements to Bali, an island in Indonesia, country in Indonesia, flowers, insects, fishes, and birds. And so, when we talk about the process has evolved a lot in 2,000 years. Let's hope it has. And so but it still basically stayed the same. It is still applying hot wax to fabric, soaking it in dye, and then getting the wax off. And so today, the most common batiks that we use in quilting and sewing are done via a stamp. And so stamps are usually about 18 inches, sometimes bigger, sometimes smaller, with copper that is hand wound into the design that you want pressed into the fabric. And so it is done completely by hand. In Bali, in Java, it is done by hand. All this copper is wound. It is then dipped into the wax and it is hand pressed every 18 inches actually into the fabric. And so they're dealing with hot wax. It is outside in cultures where there's not a lot of air conditioning, and it is actually stamped into the dye that is laid outside. As the wax hardens, it is then dipped into the secondary dye process into a giant vat. There's no automation here, guys. This is not a repeatable. This is not like, hey, we've got a machine that's creating our custom color and we go to the Home Depot and get the paint. This is literally hand dyes. Most of them are natural. Now there are some synthetic dyes, but not as popular as the natural dyes because of the economic impact. The fabric is then submerged into, it is dried and washed outside, and then heat is used to remove the wax. All manual, all done by people. And so we know the stamping. This is one, there's tons of videos on it. A lot of the large manufacturers like Hoffman still use the stamp. But you can actually take hot wax and you can write. There's actually styluses that you can use to write and hand. You're not mass producing yards and yards, but if you wanted to put in text or if you wanted to put in messages, you can actually use a handheld device that would inject the hot wax onto the fabric. There's painting. So you can take hot wax and you can put it on a brush and you can paint it on. And then there's videos, I was watching them. I went down many rabbit holes in preparation for this, of a brush with hot wax that you're painting onto the fabric to get landscape motifs as well. And of course, modern processes are moving into digital and screen printing. I think I'm not a batik person that likes the digital and screen printing aspect. I'm definitely more traditional. Give me my hot stamp process. But you know, there is a push to get more digital and more screen printing into this process. But I think, you know, it's been going on for so long. Every part is done by hand, even the part when we're melting out the hot wax and laying it out in the sun to dry and then rolling it on bolts in the United States. And so just some generalized characteristics of batiks. This bright, vibrant color scheme that we traditionally associate with batiks was actually brought in by the European influence in the 1800s. And so you can see that it has natural elements from where the stamps are made, but also colors that came in by the demand from the Europeans and the European hierarchies when the two cultures came together. And so what does that mean for all of us when we're quilting, right? So we're part of this Bali infusion of quilting batiks. That's really what we see in our stores today. And so say you're like, hey, this sounds kind of cool. I want to get in on this. What should I think about when I am sewing with the batik? I'm going to go to the quilt shop. I'm going to grab that yard. What should I think about? So batiks are traditionally characterized by their finer weave. So what that means, I mean, most of us have bought sheets and we know there's a thread count, and thread count is a number of stitches per inch. And so with batiks, it's a finer weave. So instead of, I'm going to exaggerate. So a quilting cotton is this. This is what a batik typically means. And so it is, they compress it all together. It's very, very tight. When you're hand doing these processes, guys, you have to have a tighter weave in order for the material not to degrade too quickly. And the wax relief, the way that it's able to permeate through the threads, they have this finer weave. That is a traditional characteristic of a batik. But what that means for a quilter is that it will fray less. It will also stretch less because it has a finer weave. It is incredible to use for applique because you can top stitch it and it won't fray as much as a traditional quilting cotton because it's not as loose. Those ends won't come apart as well. I like it. We love die cutting with it because when we die cut it, that cut stays and we're not getting a lot of frayed pieces coming off of it as opposed to a looser weave cotton fabric. Ironing. You have to iron batiks. Batiks, when they get a crease, that crease is, I mean, it's in there really darn good, guys. Our team here knows when we get fabric off the bolt and it's a batik and it has a crease, it's going to be a long day. And so, you know, you've got to use, this is the one time where we use a lot of steam in the shop to iron batiks because once they take that crease, it holds forever because of that tight weave. Because once it's pressed and compressed for a period of time, it does stay. And so if you are using a batik, just, you know that you're going to have to press it. But once you make that press, it's set. So if you are stitching two pieces together and you open them up and you press that seam is set. It is going to be flat. It is going to be amazing. And it's going to be beautiful because batiks hold their press better than traditional quilting cottons. You have to use a sharp needle. I've been bitten by this one before. You have to use a new, fresh, sharp needle because of this finer weave, because it is so tight. If you don't, you're going to snag more threads and you're going to leave bigger holes in the batiks that you're going to be able to see. Now, not see while you're driving by in this car and looking at a quilt, but you are going to see more holes if you do not use a sharp needle. So I highly, highly recommend when sewing with batiks to use a sharp needle. Seam ripping. Guys, this is the unfortunate bit of the batik is once you make that needle hole and you rip out the seam, you're going to have to wash it to get that a couple times to get that hole out. It is just one of those materials that once you make that hole, it can be problematic. And I know there are some quilters out there that by ripping out a seam, you can see the previous holes and it might bother you. To me, I'm okay with it because I'll usually just make the seam bigger and kind of nest them on the inside of my quilt. But that's just a consideration that if you're ripping a seam, you're going to probably see the stitch holes from the first seam that you ripped out. Also, hand sewing with batiks is harder because of the finer weave, right? So you're pushing through a denser material. And so that is just a consideration. It's not impossible. None of it's impossible and none of it's insurmountable. It's just thinking about if you're hand sewing with a batik fabric, it is going to be a little bit more work. Definitely have a finer, sharper needle. It'll make it easier, but it is going to be more work. All right. One of the things that I love about Batiks is they do not have traditionally a front or a back side to them. And so I know that can be vexing. I know for our folks here, when we're die cutting, it's super vexing because when we're counting out twos, usually we have a front side and a back side and we can count out twos easily. With Batiks, there's no front side, there's no back side. I love, and swear by using Batiks for all foundation paper piecing. Because when you're foundation paper piecing, you're usually stitching blind. You've got the paper in front of you and the fabrics on the back. And I always somehow manage to flip the fabrics wrong. With the Batik, it does not matter because there's no right side, there's no wrong side. Batiks are also great to sew with kids because they don't have to worry about putting right sides together or wrong sides together, because with Batiks, it does not matter. And so I feel like it can be confusing at first, right? For if you've been quilting for a long time using traditional quilting cotton, your first question is always, what is the right side and the wrong side? It's up to you with the Batik. And the second element is there's no selvages. And so I know that can be like, hey, I need to reorder, but that's one of those things, just it's one of the, you cannot have a selvage because it's not a machine process. It's all done by hand. And so Paula has actually handed me 2 pieces of fabric to kind of demonstrate there is no wrong side, there is no right side. These fabrics are actually the same on both sides, right? So, and I'm seeing some comments about other people who love Batiks for foundation paper piecing, especially if you're just starting out, guys, like give yourself a chance in the win column. And I would start with the Batik. All right, one of the things that Batiks are traditionally known for is bleeding when they come off the manufacturing process. Again, these are done by hand. They're done in vats. It's natural dyes. I would say, yes, Batiks do bleed depending on the color and depending on how saturated it is. I have had red Batiks bleed on me, but I bought yardage and I used retain. I used color catchers and I was able to get it out before the finished project. You know, this is kind of one of those things, as long as you're using color catchers with Batiks and as long as you're using retain and you're washing your fabric, washing your quilt top, you'll get all that color out. There's just a little bit left and it just happens. I would say it's more in the reds than most colors, but it's no different than quilting cotton. Most processes now are such that quilting cottons won't bleed because they're more color fast. And I would say Batiks are the same. It might bleed on you and it'll be okay. I would say there's lots of resources out there that if your Batik does bleed on your finished project, things you can work on, but it might bleed on you. If you have yardage, I highly recommend pre-washing it, especially in a red category. This one I'm going to classify in the myth category. So there is some, like I had as a child, that Batiks were more expensive than traditional quilting cotton. And I would say for a period of time, that was definitely true. Batiks were more expensive than a traditional quilting cotton by about, $2-ish, $3-ish, depending on the store that you were at. I would say in today's day and age, traditional quilting cotton has gone up in price faster than Batiks, and they're actually more comparable. And so I would say that's definitely within the past 3 to 5 years, just the pricing in the quilting fabric, that Batiks are now super comparable in price to a quilting cotton. And so I know that a lot of us are like, Batiks are more expensive. What if I make a mistake? Guys, they're about the same in this day and age. And so please do not let pricing impact your decision to try a Batik. All right. Odor. Okay. So this is one our team definitely knows because we do so much ironing of Batiks, because it is a natural process, because it is outside. Sometimes when you iron a fabric, it has just a little bit of residual wax in it. It can just have a smell to it. Really, there's nothing wrong there, guys. Wash it once or twice and it'll be gone. But you might be ironing it going like, what is that smell? And it's just because of the way the process is, because of the wax that's in it. It's nothing to be afraid of. It's absolutely totally normal. Depending on the manufacturer, for us, some Batiks tend to smell more than others. It's totally fine. However, I will say, we have only once in 8 years, gotten a Batik that came to us and smelled moldy. It smelled mildewy. We received it, and it was because it was wrapped onto the bolt while still wet. It wasn't fully dry. That is a very, very different smell, guys, than the Batik wax. And we rejected it. We sent it back to the manufacturer. We were not going to deal with that. But so I would say, If you have kind of this strange odor that's not mildewy, it's definitely just residual wax. It washes off. You guys are going to be totally fine. Don't let that deter you as well. And I think the last one is a common myth that you can only combine batiks with batiks. And guys, I'm here to tell you, I've done batiks with cotton and it comes out beautifully. There is absolutely nothing different. I mix batiks with cottons, and especially beautiful modeled cottons today. They all look really great together. There's definitely no reason to be like, I have to do my entire projects in batiks. If there's a fabric in a batik that sings to you, use it next to the cotton. There is no differentiation. You should definitely use them together and treat them as if they're the same and can be used together in a project. I'm seeing a comment that someone likes batik because they don't stretch as much, and accurate and iron smoother. And that's because of the weave, guys. The batiks aren't going to stretch. You cut that on the bias edge, it's not going to fray. It's not going to stretch as much. I mean, you iron anything too much, you sew anything too much, it will eventually stretch on you. But it is something that it will typically hold its shape better than a traditional quilting cotton. All right. And cut. Thank you so much for watching our video. We have so much fun making these, and we hope that you were both delighted and inspired by what you just watched. This video was sponsored by Cotton Cuts. Cotton Cuts is your one stop for all the best fabric and thread memberships. Love fabric? We've got you covered. Love thread? We've got you covered. We get that no two quilters are cut from the same cloth, which is why our memberships are as unique as you. We also have the largest block of the month in the world. Over 4,000 detectives solve our puzzle mystery quilts every year, and you can join them. Simply go to cottoncuts.com to learn more about all the awesome and fun things that we're doing. And don't forget to hit like and subscribe to make sure you get all of our new fresh content every time it comes out. Thank you so much. Happy sewing enthusiasts, and we will see you soon. Bye now.